Well, folks, hello and welcome to the very first RfRx of 2022. I am so excited to be here. This has just been something that I've missed on Monday nights, and it's going to be another fantastic show. I promise that, and I deliver on the promise every time. We just have some fantastic guests. I'm really, really excited. My name is Eric Wells, and I am the support group director for Recovering from Religion. And with me, co-hosting this evening, is my good friend Helen Green, who is an ambassador as well as a support group leader. Helen, welcome.
Hello. Hello, you wonderful people out there in internet land. Happy 2020 to y'all.
Yes. Well, we are here with RfRx, but what the heck is RfRx? This is a show that Recovering from Religion puts on, and this is where we bring on some fantastic guests, some experts to discuss topics that are relevant to folks who come to RFR for help. This isn't at all a replacement for our online community, which you'll hear about a little later, nor is it a replacement for the support groups. Instead, it's more complementary. A lot of these discussions that we have on Monday nights, they kind of show up in the helpline or show up in the online community or even in the support groups as topics to discuss, because it really kind of unlocks some things in many people's heads. This is a place where these guests and experts can bring some great advice and talk about some fantastic coping skills for what we're struggling with through the trauma of doubt and non-belief and transitioning out of religion. So if you have any questions, you can email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And all of our past RfRxs, they have been recorded and they are up on our YouTube channel. And so you can kind of take a look at those and see exactly what I'm talking about. We are getting close to the 100th episode. And I'm really, really excited about that too. I can't believe we've been doing this long. Helen, tell us about Recovering from Religion. What is this?
So for all of you who are not in the know, Recovering from Religion, basically our mission statement is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of non-belief. And how do we do those things? We do this by offering hope, healing, and support to people who need to reach out to us. So let me address the healing part first. This is offered through our helpline. So this is when, if you're struggling with issues of disbelief, non-belief, doubt, that you can call or chat into our helpline, and one of our agents is there 24/7 to listen, offer support, advice, anything that you need to kind of get you through what you're struggling with right now. There's no judgment. Everybody is very well trained, and this is basically just to offer you resources and someone that's just going to sit there and listen to you, to your concerns, what you're dealing with, and offer any support, any resources that are available. And we also, on the other side of that, we're going to go into hope, which is how we all support each other. And that is by sharing and listening to personal stories, because we're all in this together. Either those of us who have been out of it for a while, those of us who are at the beginning of our journeys, no matter where you are, we're all in this together. So that is why we have our blog and our podcasts that you can find out about different people that have been on this journey, where they are, and trying to get some inspiration and understanding people that are in similar situations that you've been, and realizing that you're not alone and that you can find help. Okay, Eric, I know that you love talking about support, so you can talk about support now.
One of the things that I forgot to do, I am so out of practice, is I forgot to do the poll, didn't I? Holy moly.
Yes, you did. Shame.
All right. Shame.
I'm
going to cut my salary in half. Folks, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. These questions are totally anonymous. We're not going to be able to see how you answer the question, but we have 4 questions tonight. The first one is, are you able to enjoy your sexuality without keeping secrets from your current or former partners? We have 4 answers, and these are the similar 4 answers for the next few questions. Yes, no, I have no intentions of having a partner, or I haven't had a partner. The second question is, do you trust your current or former partners to know you as a sexual being without shaming or judging you? Yes, no, I have no intention of having a partner, or I haven't had a partner. And question number 3, are you ashamed about things that excite you sexually? Yes, no, I'm not sure, or I do not get sexually excited. And the final question, During sex, are you able to relate? During sex, are you able to relax and be yourself? Yes, no, I have no intention of having a partner, or I haven't had a partner. So these poll questions will be going while we're doing our introduction, and then we're going to go ahead and shut it down once we begin to introduce our guest. All right, now back to our regular scheduled programming. Folks, the support groups for recovering from religion, one of my favorite parts about recovering from religion, but I am not biased at all. These support groups, these are peer support groups. This is where we get to meet face-to-face, whether it's in person or virtual. Now we're doing them, the vast majority of them are virtual. You can find the one nearest you on our recoveringfromreligion.org page. But what's kind of neat is that when we get face-to-face, when the support group leaders who run these meetings create that safe space for us to discuss the things that are bugging us, the things that have been concerning us about our past religious experiences, and the trauma that we went through, it is incredible. I have seen some folks who have come in just hurt and broken and don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they walk out courageous and with a renewed sense of hope. I love these support group meetings. In addition to that, so we talked about the helpline and we talked about the support groups, and those are both peer support. They're not professionally ran at all. So oftentimes we may need more than what peer support can offer. And so we've set up the Secular Therapy Project. And that's where folks like myself can log in and create a profile and search for a vetted professional therapist near me. These therapists are carefully screened to ensure that they have the appropriate licensing in their state or in their country to make sure that they're maintaining a secular practice. So there's no proselytizing or no risk of being preached at while you are paying for therapy. In addition to that, they're vetted to ensure that they use exclusively evidence-based treatments. So you can find that at seculartherapy.org. Now, next, one of the things that we found lacking was a community where people can kind of get together and talk about some similar things and similar issues. Like, let's say I'm not, but let's say you're an ex-Mormon or an ex-JW. There may be things that me as a non-ex-Mormon or non-ex-JW can't really relate to. So let's get a group together where you can connect with those folks who can understand what you went through and have a very similar experience. So we've created this online community, and it's through a program called Slack. It's not something that's publicly accessible. In fact, if you want to join, take a look at the helpline and ask to join, and they'll ask you a few questions to see if you're a right fit and send you an invite. But there are a ton of channels inside of this community, things like LGBTQ or secular parenting or former current military, and then a lot of ex-religions too, like I had mentioned. So you can join that group or go to the helpline and see if you and request to join the Slack group. Now, if you're looking for a community of fantastic folks that you're kind of on the other side of your transition and you want to meet a great set of non-believers, head on over to the Atheist Community of Discord. I'm going to drop a link into the chat for the ACD because right now they are streaming this show into their Discord channel, and I'm really excited to say hello to them for the new year.
If your New Year's resolution was to do more volunteer work, I have an offer for you. We are always looking for volunteers. So please, if you've been a part of this community, have you been coming to these RfRx talks, have you been talking to agents, you're part of our online community, and you see what we do and you're like, hey, I think that I would like to volunteer. Please join us, because we will find a job for you. You know, you don't have to be on the helpline agent. You can do stuff behind the scenes. You can curate stuff for our library. You can help Eric edit videos if you're good with that. Anything that you think that you have a skill that you could offer us, we will use your skill. So please just go to our website. Eric's going to post it. Fill out the application, and we would greatly appreciate you volunteering us going into this new year. So moving on from that, We are now going to move into what this meeting is going to look like. So just so you're, for all you hearing impaired people or people like me that just like to read as she's watching videos, there we now have closed captioning subtitles are available. So if you need to flip those on, they are available. So the discussion, the topic that our presenter is going to do will probably last about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, which will also include a Q&A session for 20 to 30 minutes. So if you have any questions, just please post them in the chat, directed to Eric or myself or Kara, so we can keep track of those, and we will ask them during the Q&A. And then at the end, Daryl is going to, Dr. Del Rey is going to give his closing thoughts, comments, criticisms, whatever he wants to do. And then we move into our favorite part of the evening, which is the hangout. So basically, those of you that, if you're impacted by this talk, or you just want to talk about baking, whatever you want to do, that is what we do during the hangout. So you're welcome to join us afterwards for that. And that will last till I turn into a pumpkin. So that's how that goes. So we are ready to get this thing going, Eric.
Perfect. Well, we have a fantastic guest, a fantastic returning guest, and normally either Helen and I would introduce them, but I'm going to bring on the founder and president of Recovering from Religion, Dr. Daryl Ray, to introduce our fantastic guest. Dr. Ray?
Thanks, Eric. I specifically asked if I could introduce Dr. Davidson because he's an old friend of mine, and how could I resist? Dr. Davidson and I have known each other for, gosh, probably close to 12 years, because I think we met at a conference, and it was before the Psychotherapy Project, and the Psychotherapy Project is now like 11 years old, so it's got to be longer than that, I'm thinking. But yeah, I met Dr. Davidson, and we just hit it off, and it was right about the time I was starting the Psychotherapy Project. So I asked him about it, and he was very excited about it. He was very willing to hop in and help us. And so he was one of the first team members that we had for the whole darn project. But currently, he's a psychotherapist practicing out of the Fort Lauderdale. Oh, there's a new city, Fort Lauderdale area, and he sees clients of all different issues and types and problems, and he sees individuals and couples as well. Mainly focusing on sexual problems. He's also a very big expert in this area, and he published a great book that we'll be pumping for him a bit here today, or he can promote it himself. It's a book that I've read. I don't endorse any book unless I've read every page of it, and I find it's a good contribution to the field. And I certainly was enthusiastic about endorsing Dr. Davidson's new book, Sexual Integrity. So with that, take it over, Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you, Daryl. It's wonderful for you to do the introduction tonight. And it was about 12 years ago that we met. It was in Nashville, and you were promoting your book then, The God Virus.
Oh, okay.
And we started talking about that. That book was really a very important book for me. I loved the concepts that you addressed in that book. And it was around that time that I started talking to you about this subject, sexual integrity, and my desire to write about it as a sex therapist. This is not the first book on sexual integrity. There are at least 2 others, and they take a very different approach than what I took in this book. The others really, I think, might be more appropriately titled Sexual Repression, because they're really coaching people to lean away from their sexual truth and try to move towards some sexual ideals that you and I know don't really work. And ultimately, people discover that those ideals don't work in their life or in their relationships. And that's been one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book, was to help people reclaim their sexuality and to really get in touch with how normal sexual thoughts, desires are, and that there's really a broad range of how we can show up in the world as a sexual person.
Well, Dr. Steven, what is the title of your book? I dropped some links into the chats here, but
Yeah,
before we kind of get on with the conversation, what do we got here? What are we talking about?
it's Sexual Integrity, Finding the Courage to Be Yourself. You can find it on Amazon. Also, it's available for wide distribution, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, several other book carriers around the world have it. I've done a few shows in the UK advertising the book. In fact, someone in the UK actually had a copy of my book before I even had my first copy as the author. And they sent me a photograph, emailed me with a photo of them with my book. And I'm like, what the heck? I wrote this and I don't even have my own copies yet. So anyway, it's exciting to know that it's out there in other countries as well.
Well, I'll bet in the UK version, there's a ton of misspellings. But I know what sexual is. I know what integrity is, but I can't quite get my mind around putting those two together in such an intimate way. What exactly is sexual integrity?
Well, integrity, as you know, just means that we walk our talk, we tell the truth, we live on the outside the way we live on the inside, and that we are transparent. And, recovering from religion is a lot about integrity. It's about really getting in touch with what we believe as individuals and listening to our own mind as opposed to listening to what other people have told us. And that's the same concept that I'm using regarding sex, that we innately know who we are. We know what we like, we know what turns us on, what turns us off. We know what makes us feel good. We know what kind of relationships make us happy and which ones don't. And just like with religion, we're often given a script real early in life that doesn't work for so many of us. And a lot of people try to make that script work. They try to fit into that mold. And if they're fortunate, they eventually discover that this is really not going to work, and they start doing what does work for them personally.
It's interesting that you say that, because I always call it following the recipe. Like, you're supposed to do these things and you're going to have like this perfect life. But I've always saying, like, but recipes are meant to be changed. Like, if I'm making a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, what if I want macadamia nuts in my chocolate chip cookies? And I always take it, that sort of analogy when it applies to your sexuality and who you are as a person, that just because there's a recipe you're supposed to follow doesn't mean that you can't change it or disregard the recipe altogether.
Yes, and maybe there's a recipe that worked for you at one point in your life, and at another time in life it's not working. And so the recipe needs to be modified. It needs to be changed. I actually work with a lot of older clients. I'm talking about people in their 60s and 70s who are in we'll say the middle years of their life, because that applies to me too. I'm 61, and are really questioning, what is my sexuality going to look like going forward? Because there are some decisions that I've made thus far that no longer work for me, or the world has changed and I've learned about a lot of other new options that I'd never really considered before. And the more I learn about them, the more intrigued I am, the more I feel like I want to explore and experiment. So I'm always interested to see older clients still working on achieving sexual integrity. And I think of it as something that is evolving in our life, that it's not a destination that we arrive at, but it's something that we are always asking ourselves about and checking in with ourselves to make sure that we're happy in the relationships that we're in and that we really are honoring who we are as an individual.
I'm really glad that you say that on several levels, but specifically that our sexual tastes can change over time. It's not something at all growing up in a very religious environment that was something that was even talked about, let alone even considered. And so, I'm in my 40s, and I'm just now learning about this and realizing that things can change too. It's really it's really kind of freeing. I really appreciate that message.
Yeah, and I see clients in middle and later years of their life who are contemplating their gender identity, they're contemplating their sexual orientation. Maybe there are certain areas of kink that they're wanting to explore, and they might have thought about it at other times in their life, but for whatever reason, the circumstances in their life at the present might be better for them to really explore it in a little more detail.
Now, when we get into this conversation, can we maybe have a little bit of a caveat, like coming from the place that this is assumed to always be consensual? And can we maybe start with some of those guidelines?
Well, I wrote a whole chapter on that, because when you write a book giving permission for people to enjoy sex and like sex and have a good time with it, there's always someone that wants to say, but what about this? So I wrote a whole chapter titled, "Is This Safe?" And it addresses things like consent, because this is sexual integrity does not mean anything goes. It means that while you are honoring yourself, you're also honoring other people as well, and their right to choices in their life, their right to make decisions about their own body, their own behavior. And so, there are some things sexually that are not safe and certainly are not legal. And so I do address that in the book as well. To answer that question that people might have about consent. I'm actually, in a few weeks, flying back to Nashville to a sexual health clinic there to talk to their staff about consent and sexual harassment, to do a training about how to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, and certainly in regards to their patients there at that sexual health clinic.
So where would we go now that we kind of have some of that base? What would be kind of the next step? Why do we need to talk about sexual integrity? Like, I'm kind of giving you a softball question.
Well, I need to talk about it because it's how I've made my living for the last 30 years. People come to me to talk about sex, and they want information, they want education, they want help navigating sexual problems in their relationships. They want help with issues around sexual performance, or maybe around sexual integrity. There's some part of themselves that they have split off or compartmentalized or disowned, that it's still there in the back of their mind. It's still there within their psyche, and they feel like they're not being authentic. It is the reason that I went with the mask on the cover, because a few times a week, someone uses that metaphor of the mask. I feel like I'm hiding behind a mask. I feel like people don't really know me. I feel like I am pretending to be someone that I'm really not. And so the metaphor of the mask comes up a lot in my work with clients when they feel like they're not able to be honest. And that's true even in their primary relationships with their spouse or partner, that they fear being shamed, they fear being judged, or they really fear being abandoned, being left. If I let you know everything about me, will you stay? And one of the things that I wrote on the back of the book is that intimacy cannot exist where honesty will not be tolerated.
Oh,
And
wow.
often couples say, we want intimacy. You know, one might be really pushing it more than the other. One might be really angry at the other because there are secrets that are kept. And when they talk about trust, they talk about being able to trust one partner to tell the truth. But that partner is probably keeping secrets because they don't trust the other to hear the truth. And so I talk with couples about that as well. Is there really tolerance for truth in your relationship? What if you hear something you didn't know? What if you hear something that scares you or concerns you or is different from what you believe about your own sexuality or what you thought you had in your relationship with your partner?
It's interesting you say that about wearing the mask, because, you know, I can remember when I was younger, it was all about like, can I be honest? Can I be authentic with my partner? And constantly having, like, if there's a certain desire or something you wanted to try. And because of these messages that we get, that not only in society, but even from your partner, if you like, you're watching a movie or or a comment is made about somebody else's sexual activity and they
Right.
make a joke or they say something off color, it makes you freeze and go, is there something wrong with me because I want to do this? Is there something wrong because I want to try this? And we're constantly trying to put the mask on because we're so afraid of being rejected, you know, instead of just bringing up that, you know, you have a desires for something. It's not necessarily something that you will do, but even just talking about it and even introducing it into your life can cause people to like freeze and feel like there's something wrong with them because they can't even bring it up with their partner and the people that that's supposed to love them and trust them unconditionally, you know, supposed to be like their best friend. So I think that's a lot of shame that's been put on sex and sexuality and what people desire, that's been kind of shoved down our throats, that's been harmful to a lot of couples and relationships.
Absolutely. And we communicate not just with our words, but also with our body language or our facial expressions. And so to use your example, you know, you're watching a movie and there's a scene or there's a topic and the other person says, ooh, or that's disgusting, or how awful, or, you know, they make a crinkly, nasty face that lets you know where they stand on that subject. And if this is someone you love or you want to be in a relationship with, you start noticing those things and shutting down what you will tell them or what you will let them know about you. And this happens real early in relationships, that we start trying to perform to be who our partner wants us to be or who we think they want us to be. And the more we do that, we're getting further and further away from honesty and integrity. And then one day we wake up in this relationship and we have lost erotic desire for the other person. We feel like we don't really know that person anymore. We feel a sense of distance there. So I coach couples a lot to welcome sex into the house, invite it in, serve it a cocktail or coffee or a glass of sweet tea if you're from the South, or whatever you want to serve it, but let there be permission in your house to talk about sexuality in all the ways that it can show up. Because once you start shutting down the subject, it's going to lead to problems in the relationship. We are sexual beings, and most of us in relationships want to be having sex with our partner. It's reasonable to expect that our partner is someone that we're going to have a sexual relationship with.
This can be like, just starting this conversation could be something really scary and really daunting. Where would someone even kind of begin to start this conversation, to bring it up to their spouse, because it sounds like a lot of trust is going to have to be provided to have this conversation at the beginning.
Right. Well, as a therapist, when I work with couples, I move cautiously with them. I ask a lot of questions. I listen to their responses. I listen to the words that they use. People will use lots of code words for sex. They'll say things like intimacy or making love, which doesn't really tell me a lot. And so I give people language. I give them sexual language, and I explain to them how intimacy is different from intercourse, and how intercourse can occur even in the absence of love, and that not all sex is about making love. Sometimes during sex, there's love, but not always. So I really coach couples to use the language, and I'm constantly assessing their feedback. And that feedback might be what they tell me, but it might also be their body language, how comfortable they are with the subject, how they respond to each other when one is talking about erotic desire. You know, what's the other partner doing at that time while that discussion is happening? And so it's an assessment from one session to the next, and constantly coaching people to get a little deeper with the truth, and the next time to go even a little further, and to also assess, again, truth tolerance. How deep can we go? Because sometimes some couples decide we don't really need to be in this relationship with each other anymore. And that's really scary. To be in a relationship with someone that you have history with, maybe you have children with them, and you love that person. You know, most of the couples I see, when they come in and they're having problems, they do still love each other. They do still care about each other and respect each other.
What you're kind of describing sounds like it might take some skill. Instead of jumping in full force with this conversation, it sounds like, because you're talking about assessing and listening closely, it sounds like it's taking some skill to even initiate this conversation. But let's say this is totally hypothetical. Let's say my partner and I have been having vanilla sex for a long time, and I'm like, I'd like to think that I'd like her to dress up as a schoolgirl, or I'd like to do some role play or something like that. How would that conversation how could I kind of initiate the conversation? Because I'm carrying a lot of baggage from my religious past. Like, all you have to do is just this vanilla sex. It's gross, it's dirty, and it's just, we just have to, I'm lucky that I'm married so I can take care of these sexual urges.
Well, with couples, I usually give homework. I set the foundation up front that there is not a right answer and a wrong answer. There's not a good guy and a bad guy. This is about exploring and discussing and getting to know the other one better. And so I sometimes ask couples to write a fantasy story about the other.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And you know, share your fantasy stories with each other before you come back to the next session. And in that session, we're going to talk about those stories. What are the themes that come up? How did you feel when you read the story that your partner wrote about you? How did you feel knowing that your partner had these fantasies and you didn't have that information before? Those stories also give me a lot of information as a therapist about what direction I need to take this with the couple. I then have some permission to talk about whatever subject they wrote about in their fantasy, because it's fantasy. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to act on it, but let's explore what the themes are in it. And, you know, even in really bad pornography, there are themes. There might not be much of a script, but there is a theme. And so if I'm working with an individual or a couple that does use pornography and enjoy it, I talk to them about what are the themes you're really drawn to. And let's look at what is underlying, what's the psychology underlying those themes. Because through sexual expression, through our desires, our fantasies, it's information about who we are as individuals. There's some really valuable information about the human psyche when you start analyzing or looking at people's desires, kinks, fetishes, fantasies.
So based on like, you know, what you're saying and stuff like that, it's a lot of getting people, because like if they're coming from a religious background, to give them the language about like their desires, the things that they fantasize about, like give them like permission to speak, almost like, especially if there's a lot of shame associated with even like using the right name for genitals, or calling, you know, fucking, what, you know, whatever it is, giving them the permission, the tools to express those things in a way that they're not going to be feel ashamed for. You know, they're not going to be judged for. Do you find you're doing that a lot when you're talking to a lot of couples and poly people and that sort of thing?
I had to do that more earlier in my career. I think the world is a little more sexually astute now, and it's not because we have better sexual education. It's because we have better access to pornography.
Right. That makes sense.
Yes. People are aware of a lot of things. They've researched a lot of things. They've explored a lot of things, at least through reading and research, that 30 years ago, they didn't have the ability to explore and understand in private. Religion, you know, I love to blame religion every chance I get for how it has contributed to relationship problems, mental illness, just problems in our society in general. And religion is not a friend of sexuality at all. You know, it doesn't matter which religious tradition it is, maybe some of the pagan traditions, not so much, but most religions really don't have anything positive to say about sexuality. And again, when the couple comes in and I listen to the way they talk, if they are from a really religious background or religion is still really important in their life, they let me know that pretty soon. There's evidence of that up front. I don't work well with those people. And forgive me for saying those people. I don't like the way that sounded right after it came out of my mouth. But I did grow up in the rural South in a very religious family, and I identified as Christian early in my life. I had my own struggles with recovering from religion. And so sometimes if it's too toxic, it's a trigger for me. And I have to deal with my own countertransference as a therapist, and I'm not the right therapist to work with that individual or that couple. So I refer them on. There are others that are in their own process of overcoming their shame, rethinking their faith, rethinking religion, and trying to integrate their sexuality into their life, just like they're trying to really integrate their own personal thoughts and philosophy about religion into their life. And so those are a little easier to work with. They are a little more open to options. I actually had a professor, and this was at a school of sexology, say to me several years ago, the more religious someone is in any religion, regardless of faith, the more difficult they will be to help as a client because they have so few options. and they don't have the freedom to really open their mind and think outside of the box that they are in.
I would imagine that'd be really difficult to do, you know, if you're so hardwired into religious thinking, that to seek like a secular therapist to help you out of a lot of those issues when they're told to like just pray or, you know, talk to other religious people, you know, counselors to help you. Like I have to imagine it'd be very hard to get them to see like a secular perspective on therapy and, you know, how their mind works and, you know, how the brain works and how these things are all linked together and stuff. I have to imagine that it's like, you know, trying to, you know, climb up a mountain using only a spoon, you know, so.
Well, yes. And many people have one foot on both sides of the fence. You know, they use science in their life when it's advantageous, and then the other time they use religion in their life. And some people are very comfortable straddling that fence. I say to people up front, it's on my website, it's in any promotional information about me, that I work from a secular perspective. And I respect people's right to their religion and their faith, but I don't work from that model. And so if you're coming to me, you know, whether you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, you're going to get the same information from me, because I'm going with the science. I'm going with my training as a sex therapist. And what they do with that information is entirely up to them. And so you have some choices to make. Do you listen to your sex therapist or do you listen to your pastor? And that really is their choice. It's like we began tonight with me saying there are other books out there with sexual integrity in the title. They take a completely different route with it than I do.
Dr. Steven, one of my blind spots, you know, we've been doing this show for a year, and I've learned so much that has like really kind of challenged my worldview, and I've had to confront some of my own prejudices doing the show. And one of my blind spots is I'm a cishet, a straight male, and it's not, and I have a hard time, or I don't always consider how some folks with other sexual identities may experience the world. So some of the questions and examples I brought up really kind of were pulled from my straight cishet mind. But how different would this be experienced from a perspective of a gay individual or a bi individual, or even a polyamorous individual? Or would the experiences be something similar, or yeah, what was your experience?
Well, that's a great question. And some of the most challenging cases I have had have been with people who were cisgender and opposite sex attracted. Because if you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, poly, you've had to give that some thought. You've spent some time with that. You've sat with that information about yourself for a while before you've ever told another person. And you've had to give a lot of thought to it because you don't see yourself represented in the world very often. There are not many models out there for how to do this. We're seeing more models for how to be LGBT in the world today, because we can see people on television who are trans or lesbian, gay. And so we know that there are other people out there who are like us. Poly, we don't see a lot of that represented. Sometimes it shows up in themes in movies, but there's still not a lot of real respect for the value of polyamory, and that being a way that some people love and experience sexuality in their life. So if you are cisgender and you're straight, you see yourself represented everywhere. You don't have to question sexuality a lot. You show up in relationships with a lot of assumptions and belief in the fairy tale that this is supposed to work and I'm going to live happily ever after. It's when it doesn't work that cisgender straight people start really questioning and thinking about their sexuality. And if you are LGBTQ and you've thought about this, you've contemplated it, you've come out in whatever closet you were in, then you're ready to step into integrity. You've done that work. Straight people also have to come out of closets, and it might be the kinky closet, it might be the polyamory closet. And they tend to do that work a little later in life than people who are LGBTQ.
I can say as a bi poly person, the bi part was a lot easier than the poly part.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier because with the bi part, you can, even if you can kind of choose to be in a monogamous relationship, no matter, where you are on this sexual spectrum. But being poly, because there's not a lot of representation, it's still shamed. It's still seen weird, because even if you're gay or bi or lesbian, even if you're asexual, as long as you're doing that monogamy thing, it's perfectly societally acceptable. But if you're poly, you're a sexual weirdo, and that's the message that we get, when really it's just like, I just love more than one person. That's all it is. And
Yeah.
nothing else has changed about my life or who I am as a person. And I think that's the message that a lot of poly people get out there. But because of the shame, and because that is the mindset of still any people, no matter where they are on the sexual spectrum, that's still a message that we're still kind of getting. And I think that also leads into the shame that, even if you're a straight person, if you want to be poly, it's all leads back to shame and all these messages that we get, that unless you're doing a straight man woman monogamous relationship and you're only having sex missionary style, make babies, there's something wrong with you. And
Yeah.
it all leads back to that. It's always the same path that it goes back to.
Right. And, in the end, all that matters is what's working for you and your family, you and your partner
Right.
or partners. And as long as it's working for those people involved, that's really all that matters.
Another kind of question, people who may have grown up in a religious background with like a really vanilla view of sexuality is when they start to experience or see or get aroused by other ways of being sexual, they might ask themselves, well, is this normal? And what I seeing, is it awful behavior or aberrant behavior? And if I'm liking that, then there's something wrong with me. What can people do to kind of answer that "is this normal" question for themselves?
Yeah, I think that might be chapter 4 of my book. Is this safe? And then, is this normal? Because that's another question I get a lot. And when people come to the first appointment, I ask them what they want from me. How will you measure if I have helped you? What goals are you setting? And so often people say, I just want to be normal. And then I ask them to tell me what that means, because normal is not a word that therapists really like. And it is usually something that is in a very vanilla, heteronormative Christian framework. So it's more of me educating people that normal is really exist on a very broad continuum, and it's not, a target that we are aiming for. There are lots of things that are normal, and one of the best ways that we judge it is because we see that kind of sexual behavior show up in all cultures and across world history. And sometimes it's known by other names, or it's understood conceptually in other ways, but we see some of the same behaviors. And that lets us know that it's not unique just to our particular culture, and it's not unique just to this particular time that we're living in, that it really is part of the broad ways that humans show up as sexually complex creatures.
Well, then what about chapter 3? Like, is it safe question?
So is it normal and is it safe?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how it can be safe.
Oh,
And
great. Excellent.
yeah, and so when people ask that question, is it safe? What's the potential danger they are afraid of? Are they afraid of a sexually transmitted disease? And so we can talk about diseases and how to keep yourself safe. And if you are a sexual person at all, unless you are just solo sexual, you are at risk of a sexually transmitted disease from another person. Are we talking about safe in terms of the activity itself? If it's some kind of kink activity, if it's about being flogged or bondage or some kind of S&M, you know, I try to connect people with the S&M community, and there is a community. There are S&M clubs around the country that whose motto is to be safe, sane, and consensual. And they do demonstrations, they do classes on how to engage in certain behaviors very safely.
Whoa, that would be amazing to have a class on that kind of stuff.
Well,
wow. You need to enter the kink community, Eric. I've been to those classes. You need to go. They're amazing.
Oh my God.
So like in those classes, they are facilitated by someone with a lot of experience. There are lots of witnesses around, and it's a safe place for you to try something new and to learn how to engage in that with other people who have experience in it and who know how to make it safe.
That's amazing. That's an incredible resource if you're wanting to kind of understand yourself better. That's pretty darn cool. I think that there might be another aspect to safety too. Like, what if something emotionally or mentally gets triggered for me during the course of the activity?
Well, that's another benefit of finding a club of members who have experience. They do understand that people can be triggered and that sexual expression is not just a physical expression. There's also emotions that do come up during sex. And that could be a broad range of emotions. And so they will talk about aftercare and how following a scene or following an activity, it's important to stay with that person, to talk to them, to do some debriefing. Having a network like that is very valuable because these people become friends also. It's a safe place, just like recovering from religion groups, to tell the truth, to ask questions, to learn from people who have more experience than you do. So emotional safety is another aspect of that.
That's brilliant. But the way you're describing this, it sounds like an incredibly safe place for someone who wanted to kind of figure out more of who they are in a sexual way. I'm blown away by this, as you can tell.
Yes.
I feel like I need to educate you, Eric. Just kidding. But it just struck me as funny. I'm like, I can teach you. I can give you information.
I think that not only, I think I've heard this before, but I think not only for me, but a lot of people who are watching this too might be kind of having a similar experience where like there's classes out there, there's safe spaces, so good on you, Helen, but like there's a lot of people who just have no idea that
Well,
this kind of stuff is out there.
but like I found out about it like in my early to mid 20s before like it really got big on the internet. Like I just happened to meet like really people that were in the kink scene that would bring me to classes and stuff like that. So I understand like if people are just discovering this stuff, that is still fairly new to people that aren't involved in these communities. I just happened to get lucky in my early 20s, like where a lot of people are now, you know, getting onto getting that information out there, where before, like before the internet, I don't know what people did. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, something else I want to say here is vanilla is also a flavor. And if that's what you like, it's okay to have vanilla. So, you know, for people who are listening who might not really want to engage in S&M or kinky behavior, that's okay too. It's not an expectation. That's what is so important about really knowing who you are as a sexual being, is knowing what you like, but also knowing the places that you don't need to go, because there's not going to be anything there that I want. But if you do want it, there are clubs and classes out there to help you navigate it and understand it and explore it in ways that are safe.
And would the these kind of classes, even if you like vanilla, would these kind of classes help with sort of solidifying that as well? Like, is it a safe place for just liking vanilla too?
The ones that I am familiar with, the people I know who lead these classes are very respectful of new people coming in, and they don't want to be converts for anyone. They want to mentor people, they want to teach people, they want to help people grow in the areas they want to grow. They're not there to try to force people to do something or learn something they don't want to do or learn.
Also too, like for those of us in the kink community, vanilla is a flavor and it's amazing. So, you know, whatever flavor you like, honey.
Yeah. And, you know, lots of people have kinky fantasies or S&M fantasies, and they never act on them. Or maybe they act on them in just a really mild way with their partner. You know, and also some things are better enjoyed in fantasy than they are in reality. You know, that's why it's fantasy.
And it sounds like these kind of places might be a good way to figure out if this fantasy you've written down or have in your mind is something that you even like in real life, or if something is taken away from that too.
Yeah.
I kind of grew up as a boy, and well, obviously, but the boy down the road was able to get a hold of Playboy somehow, and that's kind of the education that I got. And I have a feeling a lot of other men and women in my generation got that kind of education about how sex is supposed to be, as opposed to from our parents or from some other location. So I have a suspicion that my kind of introduction to sex was not at all realistic. Can you correct me if I'm wrong? Another softball question.
Well, I think it was realistic. It was what you had available to you at that time, and you know that's the same thing that was true for me as well. You know, I would have to look for magazines, porn magazines, and you couldn't claim to be addicted to it because you got one magazine a month. You know, and then you had to wait for another month for something else to come out if you could find one again in a month. So, you know, I think pornography, certainly for men, is our introduction to sexuality. It's unfortunately some of the best sex education that young people get. And I am an advocate for sex education. I am so frustrated that we don't allow that in this country, that we don't teach it real early in life. It's something that should be taught. I think, you can begin in kindergarten, and that's not teaching about intercourse, but it's teaching simple things like keep your hands to yourself, call people by their name. These are the foundations of early sexuality education, and then it continues to be age appropriate there on up. But we can't even do good sexuality education in colleges and universities. In my book, I talk about how I was a licensed therapist, licensed to diagnose and treat sexual disorders, when in my graduate school program, I was not required to take a single course in human sexuality. It wasn't even offered, not even as an elective. And that's true for most therapists that are out there. They don't have any training in human sexuality. It's also true for physicians, nurses, psychologists, other healthcare providers, that there might be training in anatomy and physiology and biology, but to really be trained in sexology and human sexual behavior, most healthcare professionals get no training in that at all.
It seems like there's huge need for something like that, but no training at all, or very little availability to meet that need, especially in this country, and I would imagine in several other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, my certification is through the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And that is a professional organization that people from many different healthcare backgrounds, physicians, nurses, social workers, psychologists, find ourselves doing a lot of work with our clients, our patients around sexuality, and realizing that we don't have all the information that we need. That organization provides a process by where you can get continuing education and move towards certification, so that people are more properly trained. And so there is a way to get that, but you have to search and work for it. It's not part of the typical curriculum when you go to school to be a medical doctor or a social worker or a nurse.
Yeah, I can remember that when I went to school for psych, I had one course on human sexuality, the psychology of sex. Everything else was on different forms of psychology. It was just one course you could take for your bachelor's. That was it.
Right, and you were lucky that you got that one course, because
Yeah.
some universities don't offer that.
Jeez. So, what would be the next thing to discuss? We've talked about quite a lot of sort of foundational things, and then also ways in some sense to discover what you like and what you don't like. What would kind of be the next thing, the next step?
Well, I encourage people to start where they are, to really get familiar with their bodies, to be aware of how your body experiences pleasure. And there are lots of erotic zones on the body that, are not the genitals, like the inside of our arm. If you rub that part of the arm, it feels different than if you rub the back of your arm. It's a different kind of sensation. And just having that awareness about other parts of your body and where your body experiences pleasure and what that pleasure feels like. Is it an erotic pleasure, or is it a different kind of pleasure? So certainly really knowing your own individual body, but also knowing and owning your thoughts. What are your fantasies?
Oh.
What are your desires? What fantasy do you rely on in the back of your mind that helps you connect with erotic energy? And so that's why I said a few minutes ago, vanilla is also a flavor. Start where you are. And if you're vanilla, that's absolutely fine. If you're vanilla and you want some chocolate swirls and some sprinkles, that's okay too. The important thing is that you really settle into what you know about yourself. And we do have an innate awareness. We have trouble being honest with ourselves, just like we have trouble being honest with other people. But generally, people can access that information about themselves if they are in a safe place where they have permission to do it.
Now, real quick, would you mind kind of defining erotic? I can kind of get what you're meaning from the sense of it, from the way you're using it, but would you mind just defining it and making it clear?
Yeah, another word would be sexual.
Okay.
It's sexual energy or sensual energy. You know, we were talking a lot about kink a few minutes ago and S&M, and one thing that's fascinating for me about talking to people about their kinks, their fetishes, is that so much of what really raises their erotic energy and turns them on can come from things that provides no genital stimulation at all. You know, the whole experience of bondage, it doesn't necessarily involve genital stimulation. The experience of being flogged doesn't necessarily include genital stimulation, but it can be
Oh,
very erotically arousing. You know, same things from fetishes, like with shoes or certain clothes. Sometimes when someone puts on a certain article of clothing, they feel erotically aroused by that. They feel a sexual charge. And that might be sufficient to just wear that article of clothing and there be no genital stimulation at all. So that's another part of educating people, is to help them think about sexuality and sexual expression in broader terms, because we have been taught that it's just an activity. You know,
yeah.
it's an activity. Somebody sticks something inside of somebody else. You know, it's
Right.
penetration. And you do it late at night. You do it with the lights off. And, you know, it's the last weary activity of a long, weary day. And so if we really broadened it, you know, brought it out and served it a cocktail, as I said earlier, and we talked about it on a regular basis, and we invited sexuality into our relationship and our home, then we might be talking about sex and enjoying that erotic energy throughout the whole day, not just in a often shame-filled activity at the very end of the day in the dark.
The whole day. Oh my gosh.
Well,
Called
it's all
edging.
in the brain. You know, it's all in the brain. The genitals just come afterwards. Sex is in the brain. It's in the mind. So that's the way I look at it. You know, that what might, you know, I find sexually stimulating, which is like a random thing that I'm like, okay, well, now I'm turned on. Didn't think that was going to turn me on, but it turned me on. And then other things that would turn somebody else on that I have no interest in is what turns them on. And that's just we're human beings are weird, and the things that turn us on are weird, and we just have to learn to accept that.
and weird is
It's
okay.
okay to be, but being weird is okay. Being weird is okay. As long as no one's being hurt, being weird is okay.
But you know, if we were all really honest, we would realize that we're not that weird.
Exactly. Well, we're all weird. That's the thing. We're all weird. That's what makes it so normal, is that everybody is weird.
I think a lot of us coming from the religious background, all we really can think about when we think about being sexually stimulated is genital arousal, like you had mentioned. I'm really kind of glad you made that distinction, that it doesn't have to be that there's more than just genital arousal. What other, like, if you were being sexually stimulated, what other experiences might one have to kind of, you know, help expand their emotional vocabulary of being sexually aroused or stimulated?
Well, it's about raising the erotic energy. And so sometimes music does that. Sometimes music can put us in the mood. There might be other sensations that get stimulated. There might be aromas that put us in that mood, that raise our erotic energy. A tactile experience. And that's where I was going with clothing. Sometimes the feel, the sensation of that clothing against your skin can be an erotic experience. And so that's why I really stress that people know themselves and they give some thought to this, that they be mindful and aware of what is it that turns me on a little bit? What is it that I find arousing? And let yourself have more experience of that. That doesn't mean that you are engaging in sexual activity all the time, but we are erotic beings. And as you said just a few minutes ago, Helen, we are a little weird. There are these things that are true about this. And we're going to be happier if we lean into them and just own them and accept them than we will be if we try to repress them or deny them, because they always find their way out. Again, we can't escape what we know about ourselves. We can't escape our own thoughts and desires.
Let your freak frack fly, baby. Just let it fly. You'll be a lot happier if you do it.
And that sounds like what this is all ultimately about, is just being happy and enjoying, from my perspective, the one single chance that we get on this planet. And that's kind of nice and exciting. Wow.
Yeah, all you got to do is be yourself. It's the subtitle of this book, Finding the Courage to Be Yourself. What is your own truth? What's true about you? What is it that gives you the greatest sense of fulfillment? And that can also be being, celibate.
Yeah.
Some people don't really want to experience sexuality. They don't want to engage in it, or maybe not with another person. Solosexual is a word that I used a few minutes ago, and it's a word that I'm borrowing from someone that had me on his podcast a few months ago. It's a word he used to describe himself, because he said he's really far more comfortable and gets more pleasure from masturbating than he does by engaging in sex with another person.
Perfect.
So on that note, what message would you give to people that are like asexual, on this topic? Because we're talking a lot about people like exploring their sexuality with their partners, but, people in the asexual community, might get a different message. So what would you say to them on like this particular topic?
Well, that's one more closet to come out of. And
That's true.
people who identify as asexual feel like they are being pressured all the time to have sex or to be in relationships that they don't want to be in. And so I have not worked with a lot of people who were asexual. I've had a few clients who identified in that way. And I actually talk about one in the book. A woman that I had worked with, her and her husband for a while. And her ultimate conclusion is, I really don't enjoy sex. She sometimes had solo sex, self-pleasured, but she didn't really experience that as an activity that she engaged in for erotic pleasure. It was more something that she did for release, physical release in her body. But she didn't really feel a need to be erotically connected to her husband or anyone else. And this was not a woman who had a lot of religious dogma she was trying to overcome. She was pretty open-minded about all the different options available to her, but this was her own individual truth.
Okay, yeah, because I think that's really important that, we're not just talking about like, the normal sexual expression. Like asexuality is completely normal. It's just a different expression of it. And I think that, that we're like, especially our society has this very weird schizophrenic relationship with sexuality. Like, yeah, we should be sexually free, but also it should be private. And if you're not having sex, you're weird, but if you have sex before you're not married, it's weird. And if you don't have sex in a certain way, it's weird. It's like all these stupid rules that are dumb and don't make sense. So.
I agree.
Dr. Steven, is there anything else that you feel like we need to kind of cover that we haven't already talked about, we haven't discussed? Anything we're missing here?
I don't think so. We've talked about a lot tonight. There are other things that I cover in the book. I help people sort through if they are needing help. Do they need medical help? Do they need psychological help? How to identify what kind of sexual problem you're having in your life. Is it a medical issue? Is it a relationship issue? I talk about that in the book. I also give some history to how it is that we have become so uptight with sex, and religion is one influence, politics is another. You know, American history is full of regulations around sexuality, and we're still seeing that. And so I talk about some of that history in the book. An example is in 1960, when the birth control pill came out, contraception was illegal in many states in this country. And it was not until 1972 that every woman in this country had a right to have access to the birth control pill. Laws had to be changed, and some of those laws prevented even married women from having access to the birth control pill, and some specifically targeted women who were not married. So that's a really important piece of our history that has shaped sexuality for a lot of people and influenced the options that they had in their life and the choices that they made in their life at that time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Steven. Really, really appreciated this. And I think, as you could tell from my reactions, I learned a shit ton that I had no idea about. Very, very excited to kind of go back and rewatch this on YouTube. Well, let's go ahead and move into the Q&A session. We have got a lot of questions. Helen, you want to pick one and start us off with that?
I suppose I can.
I've got one ready to go.
All right, why don't you go first, because I have to scroll down, and then you can go.
We have a question that we briefly touched on, or we touched on a little bit at the beginning, talking about starting those awkward conversations with your partner. And we talked about one way to sort of approach this by writing down what we would have as a fantasy for one another, for our partners. Do you have any other suggestions on how to kind of start and approach these awkward topics?
Well, sometimes people come to me as a sex therapist because there are topics that they are not able to discuss at home, and they want someone to facilitate them having the discussion because it feels unsafe. And so, certainly you can find a therapist to help you and your partner begin to have some of this discussion. I also think you can buy a book. You can read my book. You can say, hey, I'm reading this book. Why don't you read it? And then let's talk about it. And if it's, a third party, it's this other entity that's out there, and we're going to discuss that. That's a way to open up discussion. And then learn more from your partner based on their opinion about it, or what was valuable for them in reading that book or watching that movie or that documentary.
Excellent. I dropped those links in the chat for folks, both here and in the Atheist Community Discord as well. Helen?
So kind of on the topic of different books, this kind of goes another direction. Have you read like other like religious books on sexual like purity and passion and I guess dating goodbye? And what were your kind of thoughts on those ideas of sexuality within that context?
I have not read those books because, as I said earlier, I don't work from that framework.
Right.
I work from a secular model, a science model, and that is a specific, it's a path that people can certainly take, and I respect people's right to take that path. You know, many years ago, I worked with a lot of gay men who had gone through conversion therapy or reparative therapy at some point in their life. It did not convert any of them. But what many of them said was, I had to go down that road. I had to know that it was a dead end. Once I went down that road and I knew this is a dead end and it did not change anything, it freed me up to then get on with my life and accept who I was. And so, you know, those kinds of books, that kind of mentality, sometimes people need to walk that path and to know what a rugged path it is, how uncomfortable it is, how it doesn't lead anywhere that makes you feel good about yourself. And once you've done that, you don't have to walk it anymore.
Right.
You can go and walk in the direction that's going to be more realistic, a lot easier, and more true to who you are. So if people need to read those books, by all means read them. They're out there. There's a demand for them, which is why they exist.
Another question is, what do closeted atheists do to explore their sexuality without outing themselves?
Without outing themselves as an atheist? Is that how you understand the question?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know, atheists can pass. You can't tell by looking at us what our religious orientation is. So I don't know that you really need to out yourself while you are exploring your sexuality. I will tell you that what I have found from people who are part of the S&M community and the kink community, or people who are LGBTQ, is that because they know what discrimination feels like, there tends to be more acceptance of diversity and different kinds of thought. So I generally experience those avenues to be safe and welcoming places. But, you know, when anyone comes out of any closet, that has to be their choice. And I think we all know when it's right for us to do that.
Got it. Okay. So this is probably more of a personal question, but what would you advise someone who has just such an extraordinarily difficult time establishing intimacy and thinks lowering libido as a possibility for solving such a problem?
Would you read that again, please?
Sure. I'm just going how it was written. What would you advise someone who has such an extraordinarily difficult time establishing intimacy and thinks lowering libido as a possibility for solving such a problem?
Okay, so
or maybe they're having a hard time. I'm not sure exactly what the person is trying to get to. I'm wondering if they're using lowering libido as an excuse for having a hard time establishing intimacy. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Well, let me just address it in the way I think that the question is being asked. Sometimes, and this is a self-judgment, this is shame that people carry if they have a high libido, a strong sex drive, that they might feel like, you know, I'm supposed to only have sex when it's making love. Mm-hmm. All sex has to be intimate. It has to be an intimate experience when I'm connecting with my partner sexually. You told me at the beginning of this show that it was okay for me to use profanity. So here we go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes we want to fuck just for the fun of fucking, and it doesn't have to be intimate. It doesn't have to be pretty. It can be raw and, nasty. And we just go for it because it's a primal thing that humans do. So we have sex for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's intimacy. Sometimes it's because I really want to connect with my partner on an intimate level. But sometimes I just want to fuck. It's not about intimacy at all. So sex is also recreational. It's pleasurable. Humans, and I think maybe dolphins, are two mammals that will have sex just for pleasure. So I would, that's probably someone that might benefit from having a discussion with a therapist, is understanding, how do you think your libido impairs your ability to have intimacy? And the other thing, not everybody wants intimacy. Some people enjoy just having an active sex life and not being in a committed relationship with a partner or partners.
Ah, fantastic. Helen, you want to ask the one last question?
Sure, I can do that. So getting back to your book, is your book going to be able for an audio download?
It is not available for audio download right now.
Okay.
I am hoping that maybe around the year anniversary, I can make it available on audiobook. I really want to record it in my own Southern voice with my own Southern accent. So that's one of the reasons that it's not available right now, is I want to do the recording of that book myself. It is available on ebook format and in paperback.
Is there a chapter on STDs in the book? There
is not a chapter on STDs in the book. And, there are lots of chapters that could have been included, but they were not really focused on the whole concept of sexual integrity. So that's one of those things that would really be something more that you would deal with a medical provider.
Dr. Steven, thank you so much for taking some time out and talking with us this evening. Oh, it was really, really enjoyable.
Yeah, this was a wonderful talk.
Yeah. Before we kind of wrap up and move on to the run it through the end of the show, do you have any final words or final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on this show. It's great to see Daryl again and some other familiar faces. I really have tremendous respect for the work that all of you are doing at recovering from religion. And I appreciate you giving me this forum tonight to talk about the book. Like I said, I'll hold it up again. It's Sexual Integrity, Finding the Courage to Be Yourself. It is available on Amazon and bookstores. I'm getting lots of positive feedback from people who read it, and even from people who really believed that they had pretty good sexual integrity already and pretty good healthy sexual self-esteem have come to me or called me or written me and said, I learned something new. This made me think about another aspect of myself, and I'm always glad to hear that.
All right, folks. Man, thank you so much for sticking around and participating in this RfRx. I'm really, really glad that you're here. This was such enlightening and, like I said at the beginning, a fantastic episode. Well, even though we took a 2-week hiatus off from RfRx, that doesn't mean we're going to do it again next week. We have got another fantastic RfRx episode lined up for you, and it is entitled Confessions of an American Nun, Leaving Christianity to Find Myself and 100 Million Others. And we're bringing back Rachel Roberts from American Nuns. N-O-N-E, not N-U-N. It's so, so confusing sometimes. Here's the description. There are over 100 million oh my gosh. There are over, I'm going to be professional one day. Give me another 100 episodes and I'll get this nailed.
Words are hard, Eric. They're so
are
hard.
There are over 100 million nuns in the United States. Nuns decline organized religion and labels for their spiritual orientation, so called because they select none of the above as their religious affiliation. Author Rachel Roberts shares her journey from growing up in a Christian cult to going to a liberal seminary to ultimately coming out as a nun and founding American Nun. So I remember the last RfRx she was on, and it was fantastic. Really, really enjoyed that discussion. So I'm looking
That was
forward
really
to,
fun.
yeah.
I like that she's a Star Trek nerd.
I know, right? We really did kind of go off topic with that. Again, as a reminder, if you missed part of this one or want to see some of the other fantastic episodes that I'm telling you are there, we have recorded them. They are edited. They are on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/recovering from religion. And if you've got any questions or feedback or death threats, you can send them to our email, rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. Also, take a look at our podcast and our blog. Ladies and gentlemen, our blog is really, really cool. If you enjoy reading blogs and following some fantastic stories and conversation, take a look at our blog. Helen?
Oh, me. Okay, so if you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, you can join our join. We are on all the social medias, so you can go to our Facebook page, and there are people that have joined our Slack community. There are agents on there. There are people that volunteer behind the scenes at RfR on there. You can connect with us on there. We also have a support group on the Facebook as well, where you can get additional support and resources. We are also on the Twitter machine that we announce upcoming projects and things we're doing with RfR, our support groups and all that jazzy stuff. We are also on the Instagrams, where we announce a bunch of other stuff too, and also on the TikTok, where you can see some friendly faces at RfR, and we post like important and also silly things on TikTok, so please go see us on there. So yeah, so go see us on the interwebs and on the social medias, and like and subscribe and share, because we like that stuff, and promote us. That's a big help. Thank you.
Folks, we have at the end of every RfRx, we want to kind of hear from you. And so we have got a feedback poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And while that's running, I'm going to bring on a familiar face. You saw him midway through the beginning of this RfRx discussion, but he is amazing. He is the founder and the president of Recovering from Religion. Dr. Del Rey, welcome back. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on wrapping this whole show up.
Well, my thoughts are, thanks so much, Dr. Davidson, for coming here tonight. This is excellent. And you can just see by the chat, so I don't know if you looked at it, but lots of people have lots of comments and questions. I want to encourage everybody that's listening tonight, go get the book. I guarantee you'll learn something from it. Steven wasn't just tooting his own horn, although I have no problems with him tooting his own horn. It is a damn good book. And I think the suggestion of reading it with your partner or with another, with another person would really enhance what you learn, because the content of the book is only half of it. The other half is the questions that are brought up in your own mind. And it kind of pushes you to explore yourself, I think, more thoroughly and more honestly. I just can't say enough about it. Anyway. Glad we had you back on, and I miss seeing you. Now that you moved down to Florida, we don't get to see each other very often. So if you enjoyed what you saw here tonight, I hope you'll get out there and let people know that these are available online or live, just like they are every Monday night, and tell other people about us. If you want to give more back to this organization, please consider donating. And as Helen said earlier, please consider volunteering for us. Now, I'm going to throw this out real quick. Our big fundraiser is coming up next month. And oh, by the way, Helen's on the team for doing the fundraiser. Helen's on everything. Helen's got her finger in all sorts of pies. But anyway, look for more information from us. If you can donate, fine. If you can't, let other people know. You can help us just by letting other people know. We'll be putting a link up. We'll be putting up advertisements. We'll be putting up podcasts. We'll be doing all sorts of stuff to let people know that they can donate. This is the only fundraiser we do. We don't charge anybody anything for our services. So we exist totally off of the goodwill of those people who are willing to put a few bucks every month into our bank account so we can do all these other things.